Lee Neri stepped off the transport shuttle and onto Station Harmony for the first time. The massive space station stretched far beyond what her eyes could see. Bright lights lined the walls and ceiling, creating patterns she had never seen before. The air smelled different here. It was clean but carried strange scents from dozens of alien worlds. Her hands gripped the handle of her single bag tighter as she walked through the entry hall. Around her moved creatures that looked like walking nightmares and living dreams. A tall being with blue skin and 4 arms glided past her without a sound. Another creature that looked like a giant insect clicked its way across the floor on 6 legs. Its compound eyes turned toward her for a moment before looking away. Neri wore the standard gray uniform that all new cadets received. The fabric felt stiff against her skin, and the boots were heavier than anything she had worn on Earth. But she stood straight and kept her head up. She would not show weakness on her first day. The Galactic Defense Academy had accepted only 12 humans this year. Out of 500 new cadets from across the known galaxy, humans made up less than 3%. Neri knew the numbers. She also knew what they meant. Humanity was still new to the Galactic Alliance. Most species saw them as primitive newcomers who had barely learned to travel between stars. A mechanical voice spoke from speakers hidden in the walls. All new cadets were to report to Assembly Hall 7 for orientation. Neri followed the crowd of alien students through wide corridors. The ceilings were high enough for flying species, and the floors had different textures for creatures with various types of feet and appendages. In the assembly hall, Neri found herself surrounded by beings she had only seen in training videos back on Earth. The HFY students sat together in one section. Their insect-like bodies were covered in natural armor that looked stronger than most human military gear. They communicated through soft clicking sounds and seemed to move as one group even when sitting still. The reptilian Morden cadets took up another area. Their scales caught the light, and their muscles were clearly visible even through their uniforms. One of them was nearly 3 meters tall. Neri realized that any one of them could probably break her in half without much effort. She spotted the other human students scattered throughout the hall. Most of them looked as nervous as she felt. A few tried to appear confident, but Neri could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They were all thinking the same thing. What were they doing here among creatures that seemed built for war? A woman in a crisp military uniform walked onto the stage. Her black hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her dark eyes scanned the crowd of new cadets. She was human. Neri felt a small wave of relief wash over her. The woman spoke into a microphone, and her voice filled the hall. She introduced herself as Instructor Kim So-young, a veteran of 3 interstellar conflicts and a graduate of this same academy 15 years ago. She had been the first human to achieve the rank of Senior Combat Instructor. Instructor Kim began explaining the academy rules and expectations. The training would last 2 years. Students would learn everything from basic combat to advanced tactical planning. They would study the military history of dozens of species and learn to work together as a unified force. As she spoke, Neri noticed how some of the alien students looked at the human instructor. A few seemed respectful, but many appeared skeptical. She heard whispers in languages she did not understand, but the tone was clear enough. They questioned whether humans belonged here at all. After the orientation, students were assigned to dormitories based on their species' atmospheric and gravitational needs. Neri walked to the human section with 11 other cadets. The corridors here were smaller, and the gravity felt normal for the first time since leaving Earth. Her roommate was a girl named Bae-yeon-soo, who had trained at the Seoul Military Academy before being selected for the program. Yeon-soo seemed more relaxed than most of the other humans. She unpacked her few belongings while telling Neri about her journey to the station. Later that evening, Neri stood at the observation window in their dormitory common area. Through the thick, transparent metal, she could see the stars and the blue-green planet below. Earth was millions of kilometers away. She was further from home than any human in history had ever been for military training. Tomorrow would bring their first classes and evaluations. Neri knew the real test was just beginning. She had to prove that humans deserved to be here, not just for herself, but for her entire species. The combat simulation chamber hummed with energy as Neri checked her weapon for the third time. The plasma rifle felt foreign in her hands despite weeks of training. Around her, 5 other cadets prepared for their first real tactical exercise. 2 HFY clicked softly to each other in their insect language. Their natural armor gleamed under the artificial lights, and their compound eyes tracked every movement in the room. Across from them stood 3 Morton cadets. The largest one was nearly twice Neri's height. His scales were dark green with black stripes that seemed to shift as he moved. When he flexed his clawed hands, the sound was like metal scraping against stone. His reptilian eyes fixed on Neri for a moment, and she saw something that looked like amusement. The simulation began with a loud tone. The room transformed into a rocky canyon with narrow passages and high walls. Neri's team had to capture and hold 3 strategic points while preventing the opposing team from taking their base. It sounded simple enough in theory. Reality was much different. The HFY moved like they shared one mind. When one spotted an enemy, the others knew instantly without any visible communication. Their natural armor absorbed hits that would have stopped Neri completely. They flowed through the rocky terrain like water finding the easiest path. The Morden were even more intimidating in action. They could leap gaps that Neri would need climbing gear to cross. Their thick scales turned aside plasma bolts that should have been direct hits. When they moved, the ground seemed to shake under their weight. One of them grabbed a boulder twice the size of Neri's head and threw it like it was a small stone. Neri tried to use human tactics she had learned on Earth. She attempted to flank the enemy position while her teammates provided covering fire. But her alien teammates did not understand her hand signals. When she called out instructions, they either could not hear her over the combat noise or did not know what she meant. The exercise ended badly. Neri's team lost all 3 objectives within 15 minutes. She had been eliminated twice and spent most of the simulation respawning at the base camp. Her final score ranked her last among all participants. The HFY who had been on her team made clicking sounds that she was sure meant disappointment. The second simulation went no better. This time, the exercise took place in a zero-gravity environment aboard a damaged space station. Neri had trained for low-gravity movement, but never in real combat conditions. She floated helplessly while Morden cadets used their powerful limbs to push off walls and change direction with ease. The HFY simply gripped surfaces with their multiple legs and scurried along walls like the station had normal gravity. Neri managed to hit 1 target during the entire 20-minute exercise. Her team lost again, and her individual ranking dropped even lower. After the simulation ended, she floated in the preparation chamber feeling sick from the spinning and motion. Other cadets filed out without looking at her. The third simulation was supposed to be easier. Ground combat in a forest environment that was similar to Earth conditions. Neri felt confident as she loaded her weapon and reviewed the tactical map. Finally, something that might favor human abilities. She was wrong again. The HFY could sense movement through vibrations in the ground that Neri never noticed. They set traps that were invisible to human eyes, but perfectly obvious to their compound vision. The Morden moved through thick undergrowth without making a sound despite their size. Their natural camouflage made them nearly impossible to spot until they were already attacking. Neri spent most of this simulation hiding behind trees and rocks. Every time she tried to advance, enemy fire forced her back. When she finally attempted a desperate charge toward the objective, a Morden cadet appeared from nowhere and eliminated her with a single shot. 3 exercises, 3 failures, 3 times ranked at the bottom of her class. That evening, Neri sat in the human dormitory common room staring at her performance scores on a datapad. Park Jin-ho, a cadet from Busan who had trained with the Korean Navy, sat down beside her. His own scores were better than hers, but still in the bottom quarter of the class. Jin-ho looked at her screen and shook his head. He told her that all the human cadets were struggling. The alien students had natural advantages that made human training look like child's play. Some of the humans were already talking about requesting transfers to non-combat positions. Ba Yun-su joined them a few minutes later. Her uniform was dirty from her own failed exercise, and she looked exhausted. She collapsed into a chair and told them about her disaster in the leadership simulation. The alien cadets in her group had ignored her orders and followed their own battle plans instead. As they talked, Neri realized that all 12 human cadets were facing the same problems. They were not just competing against other students. They were trying to prove that their entire species belonged in the galactic military. Every failure reflected on humanity as a whole. The next morning brought a message that Neri had been dreading. She was summoned to the office of Commandant Choi Minwoo. The walk through the academy corridors felt like a march to her own execution. Other cadets stepped aside as she passed, and she wondered if they already knew why she had been called. Commandant Choi's office overlooked the main training facilities. Through his window, Neri could see alien cadets practicing combat maneuvers that looked impossible for any human to perform. The commandant sat behind his desk reviewing her performance files. His expression was serious but not unkind. He asked her a simple question that cut straight to her fears. Did she really believe that humans belonged in advanced military positions alongside species that had been fighting interstellar wars for thousands of years? The question hung in the air like a challenge waiting for her answer. Neri stared at Commandant Choi for a long moment before answering his question. She told him that humans might not have natural armor or incredible strength, but they had something else, something that had helped them survive on a dangerous planet for thousands of years. She just needed time to figure out what that something was. The commandant studied her face carefully. He leaned back in his chair and told her she had 2 weeks to show improvement. If her scores did not get better, he would recommend her transfer to a support role away from combat training. Neri thanked him and left his office with her heart pounding. That night, she went to the academy library instead of dinner. The massive digital archive contained military records from hundreds of species across thousands of years. Neri ignored all the alien files and focused on human military history. She read about ancient battles on Earth where smaller armies defeated much larger ones. She studied how human commanders had won fights against impossible odds. The more she read, the more she began to understand something important. Humans rarely won battles through superior strength or natural weapons. They won by being unpredictable, by adapting to new situations faster than their enemies, by thinking of solutions that no one else would consider. She read about human generals who had pretended to retreat only to lead enemies into traps, about soldiers who had used the environment in ways their opponents never expected, about battles won through deception, misdirection, and pure creativity rather than brute force. Jin-ho found her in the library at 3 a.m, still reading battle reports. He sat down beside her and asked what she was doing. Neri showed him the files she had been studying. She explained her theory that humans succeeded not by being stronger, but by being different. Jin-ho was skeptical at first. He pointed out that the aliens they were fighting against in simulations were not stupid. They had been studying warfare for much longer than humans had even existed. How could human creativity work against species that had thousands of years of military experience? Neri admitted she was not sure yet, but she had noticed something during their failed exercises. The alien cadets followed very predictable patterns. The Kethva always moved in the same formations. The Morden always used their strength the same way. They were incredibly effective, but they were also consistent. And consistency could be predicted. Over the next week, Neri spent every free moment studying alien behavior patterns. She watched training videos of different species and took notes on how they fought. She noticed that each species had developed tactics that matched their natural abilities perfectly. But this also meant they rarely did anything unexpected. The Kethva communicated through pheromones and vibrations that created perfect coordination. But this also meant they had trouble adapting when that coordination was disrupted. The Morden used their strength and armor to charge straight into combat, but they always charged in straight lines toward the strongest enemy position. Neri began developing new ideas based on what she had learned. Instead of trying to match alien strengths, she would exploit their predictable weaknesses. She would use human unpredictability as a weapon against alien consistency. Jinho agreed to help her test these theories during private practice sessions. They borrowed equipment after hours and used empty training rooms to experiment with new tactics. Neri's first breakthrough came when she realized that Kethva compound eyes were actually a weakness in certain situations. The insect-like vision that gave them perfect motion detection also made them vulnerable to light-based confusion. Neri set up mirrors and bright strobing lights in a practice room. When Jinho wore modified Kethva visual sensors to simulate their eyesight, he became completely disoriented. The rapidly changing light patterns overloaded the compound eye system. She developed this idea further over several nights of testing. By using simple mirrors positioned at specific angles, she could create light patterns that would confuse Kethva coordination. The technique was so simple that no one had ever thought to try it. Everyone assumed that superior Kethva vision was always an advantage. The first real test came during a small squad exercise the following week. Neri's team included 2 human cadets and 1 Kethva student named Vextar, who had consistently outperformed every human in previous simulations. The opposing team was made up entirely of Kethva cadets who were considered among the best in their class. Neri had hidden several small mirrors around the practice arena before the exercise began. When the simulation started, she waited for the enemy Kethva to advance in their typical tight formation. At the crucial moment, she used a high-powered flashlight to create multiple reflected light beams that intersected right where the enemy squad was moving. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The highly coordinated Kethva formation broke apart as individual members became confused by the conflicting visual signals. Their perfect teamwork turned into chaos as they tried to process too much contradictory information at once. While the enemy team struggled to regroup, Neri led her squad in a flanking maneuver that would have been impossible against an organized Kethva force. They captured the primary objective, while the confused alien cadets were still trying to figure out what had happened to their vision. Even Vextar, her own Kethva teammate, made impressed clicking sounds after the exercise ended. He told her through a translation device that no one had ever disrupted Kethva coordination like that before. It was such a simple technique that their military instructors had never considered defending against it. Word of Neri's victory spread quickly through the academy. Other human cadets began asking her to share her methods. More importantly, several alien students approached her with curiosity rather than dismissal. They wanted to understand how human thinking worked differently from their own species. Neri realized she had discovered something important. Humans were not weaker than other species. They were just different. And in a galaxy full of predictable strengths, being different was the greatest advantage of all. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt like she truly belonged here. Not as a weaker version of alien warriors, but as something entirely new. Something that could change how the galaxy thought about warfare itself. The next challenge would be proving that her success was not just luck. She needed to show that human innovation could work consistently against any opponent. The real test was just beginning. 3 weeks after her first victory, Neri stood in front of a mixed group of cadets explaining her latest tactical innovation. The practice room was crowded with students from 6 different species, all eager to learn human methods. What had started as desperate experimentation was becoming a new way of thinking about combat. Her success against the Kethva had been just the beginning. Neri spent every spare moment developing tactics that could work against different alien species. She studied Morton psychology and discovered that their warrior culture made them predictable in specific ways. They always tried to prove their individual strength, which meant they could be baited into making tactical mistakes. During a recent exercise, Neri had used this knowledge to defeat a team of Morton cadets who were twice her size. She set up a situation where the largest Morden felt compelled to charge her position alone to demonstrate his courage. While he was focused on this personal challenge, her team captured the real objective on the opposite side of the battlefield. The strategy worked because it played on Morden honor codes that were thousands of years old. They could not resist a direct challenge to their fighting ability, even when it was obviously a trap. Their greatest strength, their warrior pride, became their weakness when used against them properly. Jinho had become her most valuable partner in developing these new approaches. His background with the Korean Navy gave him insights into naval tactics that translated well to three-dimensional space combat. Together, they created formation patterns that accounted for the different movement capabilities of various species. Traditional galactic military doctrine kept each species in separate units that played to their natural strengths. HFY squads worked together with perfect coordination. Morden units relied on individual prowess and heavy armor. Energy beings like the Veltari used their unique abilities in specialized roles. Neri realized this separation was inefficient. Instead of keeping species apart, she began mixing them in ways that created unexpected advantages. A single HFY could provide coordination for a group of humans who moved unpredictably. Morden's strength could protect more fragile teammates, while they used superior intelligence to plan tactics. Her mixed species formations confused enemy simulators that were programmed to fight against traditional unit compositions. When a combat AI expected to face a human squad with human weaknesses, it had no response to humans protected by Morden armor and guided by HFY senses. The breakthrough came during a large-scale exercise involving 30 cadets divided into 3 teams. Neri was chosen as one of the team leaders, competing against 2 highly ranked alien commanders. Her team included 4 humans, 3 HFY, 2 Morden, and 1 energy being from the Veltari species. At first her team seemed chaotic compared to the others. The HFY clicked nervously when separated from their species group. The Morden grumbled about taking orders from someone so small. The Veltari cadet flickered with uncertainty about working with solid matter beings. Neri spent the first day of the week-long exercise not on combat training but on building understanding between her team members. She had each species demonstrate their abilities while explaining their natural instincts and limitations. The humans showed their adaptability by learning to work with each alien type. By the 3rd day, something remarkable was happening. The HFY began sharing their sensory information with human teammates who could interpret it in new ways. The Morden started using their strength to enhance human tactics rather than simply charging ahead. The Veltari learned to phase through matter in coordinated timing with solid attacks. The other teams maintained traditional approaches with impressive skill. Team Alpha, led by a veteran HFY commander, moved with perfect precision and coordination. Team Beta, under Morden leadership, dominated through superior firepower and armored assaults. Both teams achieved excellent results in early objectives. But Neri's mixed team began showing advantages that neither opponent could counter. When Team Alpha used their coordinated tactics, Neri's forces responded with chaotic maneuvers that broke up formations. When Team Beta relied on frontal assault, the mixed team used Veltari phasing abilities combined with human misdirection to attack from impossible angles. The final day brought the ultimate test. All 3 teams had to capture and hold a fortified position, while preventing the others from taking it from them. Traditional doctrine said this favored the team with the strongest individual fighters or the best coordination. Neri's team won by doing something no one expected. Instead of fighting both enemy teams, they convinced Team Alpha to temporarily ally with them against Team Beta's superior firepower. Then, when Team Beta was defeated, they used a completely different set of tactics to outmaneuver their former allies. The victory was achieved not through superior strength or coordination, but through psychological manipulation and adaptive thinking. Neri had read the commanders of both enemy teams correctly and predicted how they would respond to different situations. After the exercise ended, both opposing commanders approached Neri with respect she had never seen from alien cadets before. The HFY team leader said that human tactical thinking was unlike anything in their military databases. The Morden commander admitted that he had underestimated the effectiveness of mixed-species cooperation. More importantly, cadets from other teams began requesting transfers to work with Neri's methods. Even species that had never worked together before wanted to learn these new approaches to warfare. The academy instructors started taking notes on her techniques for possible inclusion in official curriculum. Instructor Kim So-young called Neri to her office after reviewing the exercise results. The older woman smiled as she told Neri that her performance rankings had moved from the bottom 5% to the top 15% in just 1 month. More significant was that cadets from across the galaxy were asking to study human tactical philosophy. Neri realized that she was no longer trying to prove that humans belonged at the academy. Instead, she was showing the galaxy that human thinking could revolutionize military strategy for every species. The student who had once feared failure was becoming a teacher that others wanted to follow. But she knew the real challenges were still ahead. Individual exercises were one thing. The Academy's ultimate test would push every skill she had developed to its absolute limit. Everything she had learned would be needed for what was coming next. The transport ship descended through thick clouds toward the surface of Kepler 442, a planet that the Academy used for its most demanding final examination. Neri pressed her face against the small window and watched jagged mountains and dense forests appear below. This world had been chosen specifically because it was hostile to every known species in the galaxy. Commandant Choi's voice came through the ship's communication system as they prepared to land. He explained that this month-long exercise would test everything the cadets had learned over 2 years of training. They would face not only each other, but also automated defense systems that had been programmed to eliminate them using lethal force. 60 cadets from the Academy's top performers had been selected for this final test. They would be divided into teams of 5 members each. The teams that survived and completed their objectives would graduate with honors. Those who failed would either repeat their final year or be transferred to non-combat roles. Neri looked around at her assigned teammates as the ship touched down. Jin-ho sat beside her, checking his equipment for the 5th time. His nervous energy was obvious, but she knew he would be reliable when the fighting started. They had worked together too many times for her to doubt his abilities now. Across from them sat 2 HFY cadets named Zixka and Morvel. Both had specifically requested to be on Neri's team after seeing her mixed-species tactics work in previous exercises. Their compound eyes tracked every movement in the transport compartment, and their antennae twitched with anticipation. The 5th team member was Carthon, a Morden warrior who stood nearly 3 meters tall even when sitting down. His dark green scales were marked with scars from training accidents, and his clawed hands could crush metal without effort. He had been skeptical of human leadership at first, but Neri had earned his respect during recent war games. The transport door opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Hot, humid air rushed into the compartment carrying scents of alien vegetation and something that smelled like sulfur. Neri stepped onto the planet's surface and felt the ground beneath her boots. The gravity was slightly heavier than Earth normal, but not enough to cause serious problems. Around them, other teams were already moving away from the landing zone toward their assigned starting positions. Each team had different objectives, scattered across hundreds of square kilometers of dangerous terrain. Some had to capture fortified positions. Others needed to rescue simulated prisoners or destroy specific targets. Neri's team had drawn one of the most difficult missions. They needed to infiltrate and capture a heavily defended communications facility that was protected by both automated systems and teams of opposing cadets. The facility was located in the center of a deep valley, surrounded by mountains on all sides. As they moved away from the landing zone, Carthon voiced what they were all thinking. The mission seemed impossible for a team of 5 cadets against unknown numbers of enemies and computer-controlled defenses. Traditional military doctrine would call for a much larger force to assault such a target. Neri reminded him that traditional doctrine had not been working very well for anyone lately. Her unconventional methods had succeeded precisely because they were unexpected. This mission would require the same kind of thinking that had brought them all together as a team. During their first night on the planet, they encountered their first real challenge. The automated defense systems included flying drones that patrolled the wilderness looking for cadet teams. These machines were equipped with sensors that could detect most known species from several kilometers away. The drones had been programmed to recognize HFY heat signatures, Morden movement patterns, and human biological markers. They were designed to be nearly impossible to avoid using conventional camouflage techniques. Most teams would spend days trying to sneak past these mechanical sentinels. Neri had a different idea. Instead of hiding from the drones, she decided to confuse them. She had her team create false signatures that would make the machines think they were seeing something else entirely. Zixka and Morvel used their natural pheromone production to create scent trails that led away from their actual path. Carthon used his strength to move heavy rocks and create vibration patterns that mimicked a much larger group moving in the wrong direction. Jinho set up electronic devices that broadcast false heat signatures at locations far from their real position. The plan worked better than Neri had hoped. The drones detected multiple false targets and began chasing shadows while her team moved through areas that the machines thought were empty. By dawn, they had covered twice the distance that any other team could have managed while avoiding detection. But their success brought new problems. As they approached the target valley, they encountered Team 7, led by a HFY tactical genius named Vorthak, who had never lost a training exercise. His team had been assigned to defend the communications facility, and they had prepared for exactly this kind of assault. Vorthak's defensive positions were perfectly placed to stop any conventional attack. His HFY teammates had set up overlapping fields of fire that covered every approach road. 2 Morden warriors provided heavy firepower from armored positions. The entire defense was coordinated through the same kind of hive-mind communication that made HFY forces so effective. Neri studied the enemy positions through binoculars while her team waited in concealment. Every military textbook would say that 5 attackers could never defeat 5 well-positioned defenders who held the high ground. The smart move would be to find another target or wait for reinforcements that would never come. Instead, Neri began planning an assault that would use every unconventional tactic she had developed over the past year. She would turn the defenders' greatest strengths against them and exploit the one weakness that no HFY commander would ever expect to face. The weakness was simple. Vorthak was too good at traditional warfare. His defensive plan was perfect according to every known military principle, but perfection could be predicted, and predictability could be defeated by someone willing to do something completely insane. Neri gathered her team and began explaining her plan. The looks on their faces told her that they thought she had lost her mind. Jinho asked if she was sure this would work. Carthon wondered if they should consider retreat instead. She told them that retreat was not an option. They had come too far and learned too much to give up now. This was their chance to prove that human innovation could overcome any challenge. Win or lose, they would face this test the same way humans had always faced impossible odds, by being too stubborn to know when they were beaten. Neri crouched behind a fallen tree trunk and watched the enemy positions through her scope. Vorthak had placed his defenders exactly where any military academy would teach them to go. The high ground gave them perfect sight lines across the entire valley. Their overlapping fields of fire covered every logical approach road. It was a textbook perfect defense, which was exactly why it would fail. She turned to her team and began explaining her plan in whispers. Jinho would create a diversion on the eastern slope using smoke grenades and sound generators. The defenders would naturally focus their attention toward the obvious threat while assuming it was the main attack. Zixka and Morvel would use their natural climbing abilities to scale the western cliff face that Vorthak had dismissed as impossible to climb. Most species could not make that ascent, but HFY could grip rock surfaces that would defeat other climbers. They would position themselves above the enemy and wait for Neri's signal. Carthon would circle around to the north where the terrain was most difficult. His massive strength would let him move through boulder fields that would stop smaller soldiers. He would create the impression of a second assault force trying to flank the position. Neri herself would do something that no sane commander would ever attempt. She would walk straight up the main approach in full view of all the defenders. Not charging, not sneaking, just walking like she belonged there. Her teammates stared at her in disbelief. Jinho asked if she had suffered some kind of head injury during their trek through the forest. Carthon pointed out that the enemy would simply shoot her the moment she appeared in the open. Neri smiled and told them that was exactly what she was counting on. Vorthak was a perfect tactical genius who had never lost because he always did exactly what military doctrine said he should do. His perfection was also his greatest weakness because it made him completely predictable. When the attack began, Jinho's diversion worked exactly as planned. Explosions and plasma fire erupted from the eastern slope as his devices created the impression of a full assault. The defending HFY immediately shifted their coordination focus toward this obvious threat. Two of them moved positions to better cover the eastern approach. At the same time, Carthon began his advance from the north. His heavy footsteps and crashing through vegetation announced his presence to everyone in the valley. The Morden defenders turned their heavy weapons toward this new threat, just as Neri had predicted they would. While the defenders dealt with two obvious attacks, Zixka and Morvel climbed the supposedly impossible western cliff. Their compound eyes found handholds that other species would never see. Their multiple limbs let them move across vertical rock faces like insects walking on walls. Within minutes, they were in position above the enemy with clear shots at the command post. Then Neri began her walk up the main slope. She moved slowly and deliberately, making no attempt to hide her approach. Her weapon was lowered, and she showed no signs of aggression. To the defending HFY, she looked like either a target so easy it had to be ignored, or a trap so obvious it could not be real. Vorthak faced a choice that his perfect training had never prepared him for. Standard doctrine said to eliminate obvious threats immediately, but standard doctrine also said that obvious threats were usually diversions for real attacks elsewhere. His tactical programming could not decide how to respond to something so blatantly suicidal. The defending commander made the choice that Neri had gambled he would make. He ordered his forces to continue focusing on the flanking attacks while assigning only one soldier to deal with the walking target on the main slope. It was the tactically correct decision based on everything he had been taught. It was also exactly wrong for this situation. The single defender assigned to stop Neri was Kelthvar, a HFY cadet who had graduated second in marksmanship. He took careful aim at the approaching human and prepared to end this strange attack with one precise shot. But Neri was not walking randomly. Every step was calculated to keep her in the exact position where Kelthvar's shot would be blocked by terrain features for just a moment longer. She had studied the defensive positions for hours and knew exactly where each defender could and could not see clearly. When Kelthvar finally had a clear shot, Neri was already close enough for the next phase of her plan. She dropped to the ground and activated a device that Jinho had built based on her specifications. Bright strobing lights erupted from multiple points around her position, creating the same kind of visual chaos that had worked against HFY before. Kelthvar's compound eyes overloaded from the conflicting light patterns. His perfect aim became useless as his visual system tried to process too much information at once. While he struggled with temporary blindness, Neri completed her approach and eliminated him with a close-range shot. The loss of one defender broke Vorthak's perfect coordination. His remaining forces suddenly had a gap in their defensive line that Neri was already exploiting. She signaled her teammates to begin the real attack, while the defenders were still trying to understand what had happened. Zixka and Morvel opened fire from their elevated positions, forcing the remaining defenders to take cover. Carthon charged from the north while the enemy was distracted by threats from above. Jinho stopped his diversion and began moving toward the actual objective. Vorthak tried to reorganize his defense, but Neri had broken his coordination at the worst possible moment. His forces were spread out, responding to multiple threats, and could not provide mutual support. The perfect defensive position became a series of isolated strong points that could be defeated individually. The battle lasted only 12 more minutes. When it ended, Vorthek's team had been completely eliminated while Neri's force had suffered only minor injuries. The communications facility was captured intact with all its valuable intelligence data. As they secured the objective, Carthon shook his massive head in amazement. He told Neri that he had never seen anything like her frontal assault. Walking into enemy fire should have been suicide, but somehow she had turned it into a victory. Neri explained that the attack had worked because it was so obviously wrong that a perfect tactician could not respond to it properly. Vorthek had been defeated by his own expertise. His knowledge of correct military procedure had become a weakness when facing someone willing to do something completely incorrect. But their celebration was cut short by an emergency signal from Academy Command. New threats were appearing across the planet that no team had trained to face. Automated systems that had been dormant were suddenly activating with weapons and tactics that exceeded anything in the exercise parameters. The test was about to become much more dangerous than anyone had planned. Neri realized that everything they had accomplished so far had been preparation for a challenge that would push human innovation to its absolute limits. The emergency alert crackled through Neri's communication device as her team secured the captured facility. Academy Command reported that something had gone wrong with the exercise systems. Automated defenses across the planet were activating beyond their programmed parameters. What had been a training simulation was becoming a real survival situation. Through the facility's monitoring screens, Neri watched feeds from across the planet. Teams that had been performing well were suddenly trapped by defenses that seemed to learn and adapt. The Veltari energy constructs that had been dormant were now actively hunting cadets with intelligence that exceeded their original programming. Jinho pointed to one screen showing Team 4 pinned down by constructs that moved like liquid metal. Every time the cadets tried a new tactic, the energy beings adapted their response within minutes. Traditional military strategies were failing because the enemy was evolving faster than anyone could adjust their plans. Carthon growled that the exercise had become unfair. The cadets were trained to fight predictable opponents with known capabilities. These adaptive constructs were using abilities that no one had prepared for. Several teams were already requesting emergency evacuation. Neri studied the screen feeds more carefully. She noticed something that others were missing. The Veltari constructs were adapting, but their adaptations followed patterns. They analyzed each attack and developed countermeasures based on logical military responses. They were becoming more tactically perfect with each encounter, which meant they had the same weakness that she had exploited against Vorthek. She activated the facility's communication array and sent a message to all remaining teams on the planet. Her plan was simple but would require coordination between groups that had been competing against each other for weeks. Some team leaders responded with skepticism. Others asked why they should trust tactics from someone who had been ranked last in combat exercises just months ago. The first test of Neri's theory came when Team 9 encountered a group of constructs near the northern mountains. Instead of using conventional military tactics, they followed her instructions to act as randomly and irrationally as possible. Instead of coordinated attacks, they used chaotic movements that made no tactical sense. The constructs tried to adapt to this new behavior, but found nothing logical to analyze. Their learning algorithms were designed to counter intelligent military planning, not complete randomness. When faced with truly irrational opponents, the energy beings became confused and ineffective. Team 9 not only survived their encounter, but managed to destroy 3 constructs that had seemed invincible just hours before. News of this success spread quickly to other trapped teams. Within 2 hours, 8 different groups were using variations of Neri's chaos tactics against the adaptive defenses. But Neri realized that individual team survival was not enough. The constructs were learning from each encounter and would eventually develop responses even to random behavior. She needed to organize something larger than anything attempted in Academy history. She sent detailed instructions to all teams still active on the planet. Instead of fighting separately, they would coordinate a planet-wide assault that used human chaos theory as its foundation. Every team would attack different targets simultaneously using deliberately contradictory tactics that would overload the construct's learning systems. The plan required precise timing across dozens of locations. Teams that had been enemies hours before would have to trust each other completely. Traditional military commanders would have called the idea impossible. There were too many variables and too many chances for failure. Jin Ho voiced what everyone was thinking. Neri was asking 60 cadets from different species to abandon everything they had learned about warfare and follow tactics that seemed designed to fail. Why would alien students trust human innovation over their own proven methods? Neri reminded him that proven methods had created the current crisis. The constructs were adapting because they understood conventional warfare better than the cadets did. Only by abandoning logic completely could they hope to fight enemies that were becoming more logical with each battle. The coordinated assault began at exactly sunset when the planet's position would create the maximum electromagnetic interference. Neri had calculated that this natural phenomenon would disrupt construct communications just enough to prevent them from sharing adaptive information instantly. From her position at the captured facility, Neri watched feeds from across the planet as the most chaotic military operation in galactic history began. Team 3 attacked their target by walking backwards while firing randomly into the air. Team 7 used ancient human war cries while charging directly into superior firepower. Team 12 pretended to retreat while actually advancing through underground tunnels. Each attack was so tactically wrong that the constructs could not develop effective responses. Their learning algorithms tried to find patterns in behavior that was deliberately patternless. Some energy beings simply shut down when faced with actions that violated every known principle of warfare. The assault succeeded beyond Neri's wildest hopes. Within 3 hours, every active construct on the planet had been destroyed or disabled. Teams that had been trapped for days were suddenly free to complete their original objectives. The exercise that had seemed impossible was now proceeding normally again. Academy Command sent immediate messages demanding to know how a training exercise had been resolved by tactics that appeared in no military database. Senior instructors requested detailed reports on the methods used to defeat adaptive artificial intelligence. Military theorists from across the galaxy asked for copies of Neri's tactical innovations. More importantly for Neri, her fellow cadets began looking at her differently. The alien students who had once dismissed humans as primitive newcomers now approached her with genuine respect. Team leaders from the most advanced species asked permission to study her methods. Vorthak, the HFY commander she had defeated earlier, sent a personal message acknowledging that she had taught him something no instructor ever had. Perfect tactics were not always the best tactics. Sometimes victory required accepting imperfection as a weapon against opponents who expected rational behavior. When the final exercise ended and all teams returned to the academy, Neri learned that her innovations had changed more than just combat outcomes. Military academies across 3 sectors were requesting information about human tactical philosophy. Research institutes wanted to study how human cognitive flexibility could be applied to other fields. But the most significant change was in how her fellow cadets treated human students. The 12 humans who had arrived as questionable additions to the program were now seen as valuable contributors to galactic military science. Other species began requesting mixed species teams, specifically to include human tactical thinking. Neri realized that she had accomplished something beyond her original goals. She had not just proven that humans belonged in the galactic military. She had shown that human thinking could revolutionize how every species approached warfare itself. The student who had once feared failure had become a teacher whose lessons would spread across the entire galaxy. The graduation ceremony took place in the Academy's main assembly hall, the same room where Neri had first felt so small and out of place 2 years earlier. Now she stood on the stage wearing the blue uniform of a graduated officer, while hundreds of cadets and instructors filled the seats below. The difference was remarkable, but the biggest change was not in her appearance. It was in how everyone looked at her. Commandant Choi called her name, and she stepped forward to receive her commission. As he handed her the rank insignia of a junior tactical officer, he spoke quietly so only she could hear. He told her that in 30 years of running the academy, he had never seen a student change military thinking as completely as she had done. The ceremony continued with other graduates receiving their assignments to various fleets and commands across the galaxy. Neri listened as her classmates learned where their military careers would take them. Jinho was assigned to the 7th Fleet as a communications specialist. Bai Yun-su would serve with the 4th Sector Defense Corps as a training coordinator. When her turn came, Neri expected to hear about her assignment to some remote outpost where a new human officer could learn from more experienced commanders. Instead, Commandant Choi announced something that surprised everyone in the hall. 3 different alien military commands had formally requested Neri as a tactical advisor. The HFY Collective wanted her to help develop new coordination protocols. The Mordan Empire had offered her a position teaching psychological warfare techniques. The Veltari Council requested her assistance with adaptive defense strategies. Any one of these offers would have been a tremendous honor for a new graduate. For a human to receive all 3 was unprecedented in galactic military history. Some of the alien cadets in the audience made sounds of amazement in their various languages. But Neri surprised everyone again by declining all 3 offers. She stepped to the microphone and explained her decision to the assembled crowd. While she was honored by these opportunities, she believed her skills could be better used in a different way. Instead of serving with existing military structures, she wanted to create something entirely new. With the Academy's permission, she would establish the first human tactical innovation center. This facility would study how human cognitive flexibility could be applied to military problems that had no traditional solutions. More importantly, it would teach mixed-species tactics to officers from across the galaxy. The idea was ambitious beyond anything previously attempted. Most military training focused on single-species doctrine, with occasional cooperation between similar forces. Neri's center would train completely integrated units where different species worked together as naturally as members of the same race. Jinho immediately volunteered to serve as her deputy commander. His experience with human naval tactics and alien communication systems made him the perfect partner for this new venture. Bai Yun-su requested a transfer from her original assignment to head the center's training division. Her background in military education would be essential for developing new teaching methods. Within a week of graduation, 12 other humans and 26 alien officers had applied to join the Innovation Center. The facility would be located on Station Harmony itself, using converted academy training spaces that had been expanded specifically for this purpose. The center's first class included 60 officers from 18 different species. Some were recent graduates like Neri's team. Others were experienced commanders who wanted to learn these new approaches to warfare. A few were military theorists who hoped to understand how human thinking could be systematically taught to non-human students. Neri's first lecture began with a simple question. She asked the assembled officers to forget everything they had learned about proper military tactics. Instead, she wanted them to think about what they would do if they knew their actions made no logical sense. The alien officers looked confused by this request. Their entire military training had focused on logical decision-making and rational tactical planning. The idea of deliberately choosing irrational actions seemed to contradict everything they had been taught. But Neri persisted. She showed them recordings of her victories against supposedly superior opponents. In each case, success had come not from better logic, but from abandoning logic entirely. She had won by being unpredictable in situations where predictability was expected. The breakthrough came during the 3rd week of training when a HFY commander named Silthex successfully used chaos tactics against a simulation programmed by his own species. The exercise had been designed to be impossible for HFY forces using traditional coordination methods. By deliberately breaking coordination and acting randomly, Silthex achieved objectives that perfect teamwork could never have accomplished. His success proved that Neri's methods could work for any species willing to abandon their natural instincts. Word of the Innovation Center's success spread quickly through military networks across the galaxy. Senior commanders began sending their best officers for training in human tactical philosophy. Several wars that had reached stalemates were resolved when one side applied chaos theory techniques to break deadlock situations. Neri found herself consulting on conflicts she had only read about in history classes. Her advice helped end a territorial dispute between two energy-based species by suggesting negotiation tactics that neither side could predict or prepare for. A mining rights conflict was resolved when human mediation techniques confused both parties into accepting a compromise that satisfied everyone. 6 months after graduation, Neri received a promotion to senior tactical instructor, making her the youngest officer in galactic history to achieve that rank. More importantly, her methods were being studied at military academies throughout known space. The center's success led to requests for additional facilities. Plans were approved for innovation centers in 4 other sectors, each staffed by officers who had trained under Neri's direct supervision. Her influence was spreading across the galaxy faster than anyone had thought possible. But Neri's greatest satisfaction came from seeing her former classmates succeed using the methods they had learned together. Jin Ho had been promoted twice in 6 months. Bai Hyun-soo was developing training programs that would be used throughout the galactic military. Even alien officers who had once doubted human capabilities were now requesting human tactical advisors for their commands. As she stood in her office overlooking the academy training facilities, Neri reflected on how far she had come. 2 years ago, she had been a struggling cadet who feared she did not belong among alien warriors. Now she was training those same aliens in combat methods the humans had developed through necessity and stubbornness. The transformation was complete, but Neri knew her real work was just beginning. Her legend was growing, but legends were only valuable if they inspired others to achieve even greater things. 5 years had passed since Neri first stepped off the transport shuttle onto Station Harmony as a nervous cadet. Now she walked through the same corridors wearing the silver insignia of a full commander, the youngest officer in galactic history to achieve such rank. But the real change was not in her uniform or her position. It was in how the entire galaxy thought about warfare. The main lecture hall was packed with over 300 new cadets from 47 different species. Neri stood before them, knowing that many had traveled from distant sectors specifically to learn at the academy that had become famous for human tactical innovation. What had started as one student's desperate attempt to survive had become a revolution in military thinking. She looked out at the eager faces in the audience and saw herself 5 years ago. Young beings from across the galaxy who wanted to prove themselves worthy of serving in the galactic military. The difference was that now they came here specifically to learn how to think like humans. Neri began her lecture with the same question she had asked her very first class at the Innovation Center. She told them to forget everything they thought they knew about proper military tactics. Instead, she wanted them to consider what they might accomplish if they were willing to do things that made no logical sense. The alien cadets listened with attention that would have amazed her younger self. Kethva students took careful notes on chaos theory applications. Morden warriors studied psychological warfare techniques with the same intensity they once reserved for physical combat training. Energy beings analyzed the mathematics of deliberate unpredictability. During the break between lectures, Neri walked through the academy halls that had once seemed so intimidating. Now the corridors were lined with displays showing the success of mixed-species tactical units that used human innovation methods. Battle reports from across the galaxy credited her techniques with ending conflicts that had lasted for decades. The Central War College on Proxima had established a chair of human military philosophy. 3 different species had rewritten their basic tactical manuals to include chaos theory principles. The Galactic Defense Force now required all senior officers to complete training in adaptive thinking techniques. But the achievement Neri was most proud of was not displayed on any wall or mentioned in any official report. It was the fact that 12 humans were no longer seen as questionable additions to the galactic military. Human officers now served with distinction in every major fleet and command structure across known space. Jinho had been promoted to captain and commanded his own mixed-species tactical unit. His ship had successfully resolved 3 different territorial disputes, using negotiation methods based on human psychological understanding. Wei Yan-su directed the Advanced Training Institute that taught Neri's methods to senior officers throughout the galaxy. Even more importantly, the new human cadets arriving at the academy each year were welcomed as valuable assets rather than primitive newcomers. Other species competed to have humans assigned to their units because human tactical thinking had proven so effective in complex situations. Neri's afternoon was spent reviewing applications from officers requesting advanced training at the innovation centers. The original facility on Station Harmony had expanded to include 12 specialized departments. Additional centers in 4 other sectors were operating at full capacity with waiting lists extending for months. Her methods had been given an official name in military documentation. Neri's paradox was now taught as a fundamental principle at academies across the galaxy. The concept was simple but revolutionary. What appeared to be human weaknesses could become tactical advantages when applied correctly. Physical limitations forced humans to develop superior adaptability. Lack of natural weapons led to innovation in psychological warfare. Inability to match alien coordination resulted in breakthrough techniques for managing chaos and unpredictability. The afternoon lecture focused on the practical applications of these principles. Neri used case studies from recent conflicts where human tactical advisors had achieved victory through methods that violated every traditional military rule. Each example demonstrated how apparent disadvantages could become decisive advantages. After classes ended, Neri walked to her favorite spot in the academy. The observation deck overlooked the main training facilities where hundreds of mixed-species teams practiced the tactics she had helped develop. Watching them work together reminded her of how far everyone had come. A group of new human cadets approached her as she stood at the railing. Their leader, a young woman from Mars named Park So-jin, asked for advice about adapting to life among alien classmates. She admitted feeling overwhelmed by the physical capabilities and natural advantages of other species. Neri smiled and told So-jin the same thing instructor Kim So-young had told her years ago. Humans did not need to be the strongest or fastest or most naturally gifted warriors in the galaxy. They just needed to be the most willing to find solutions that no one else would consider. She pointed to the mixed species teams training below and explained that each of those units succeeded because they combined different kinds of strength. Alien physical advantages worked best when guided by human adaptability. Natural weapons became more effective when enhanced by human innovation. The key was not trying to be something humans were not. The key was being the best possible version of what humans actually were. Creative, stubborn, unpredictable, willing to try things that seemed impossible until they worked. As the young cadets walked away with renewed confidence, Neri noticed a familiar pair of combat boots displayed in a place of honor near the observation deck entrance. Her original boots from cadet training had been preserved as a symbol of how far human officers had risen in the galactic military. The plaque beneath them read simply, Commander Lee Neri, from student to legend, proof that human innovation can change the galaxy. Neri read the words and realized that her legend was not really about her individual achievements. It was about proving that humans belonged among the stars not as copies of other species, but as themselves, different, unexpected, and absolutely essential. The Academy's evening announcement echoed through the corridors as thousands of cadets prepared for another day of training. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove that human thinking could solve problems that had never been solved before. Neri walked toward her quarters knowing that her real work would never be finished. Every new class of human cadets would carry her methods to commands across the galaxy. Every mixed species unit would demonstrate that diversity of thinking was the greatest weapon any military could possess. The legend would continue growing, but now it belonged to all of humanity, rather than just one stubborn cadet who had refused to accept that she did not belong among the stars.